All right, and it is it's 2 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. So, all right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. We were continuing our exhibit here at the History Center called "Sails, Trails, Rails, and Wings," and today we have Mike Geer. He is the airport manager at the Aransas County Airport, and his presentation today is called Staging Hurricane Recovery. So thank you very much, Mike, for being here. We really appreciate it, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Dave. And if it's okay, I'll start screen sharing whenever you let me.
Okay, let's see here. Let me make sure I could do that. Okay, I think, yep, we got you.
Okay, great. All right. Good morning, or I'm sorry, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Geer. I'm the Aransas County Airport Manager. I've served in this capacity since 2014. Apologize, I told Dave ahead of time, and I told Pam last week that I suffer from seasonal allergies, and this is how they make me sound. I sometimes lose my voice, so I'm going to try to do the best I can. I've got some lozenges here. And I apologize for my attire. I normally probably would have dressed up a little bit more for this, but I had to come out to the airport a little early. We had a plane bounce off the runway and end up nose down in the sand, but everybody's okay. You may hear about it on the, from the paper. I think Mike Probst might have heard about it. So I'd like to begin by saying that at Rockport Airport, when I took over in 2014, I took over from the man in the center of the picture there. That's Eugene Johnson in the green shirt. We took this picture at the dedication of the new airport sign that you can see right there behind everybody. That was out on Highway 35. The gentleman standing in the middle of the frame, the tallest at the back, is he's the TxDOT Aviation Director, Dave Fulton. Dave flew in for the dedication of the sign. You can also see from left to right, you have Charlie Smith, Mayor Kendrick, some members of the airport board. There's Mayor Wax and Judge Mills, former Commissioner Betty Stiles, and then we have Commissioner Jack Cheney, and then Diane's back there in the back right corner. But this was a big deal because the airport hadn't had a good sign in a long time, and there was a lot of money that went into it, a lot of effort. And but Gene was the manager whenever the sign was conceived. I happened to be the manager when it was finished, so I thought it was important to get Gene back out here for that. What I didn't know at that time is we only had about 6 more months with Gene before he would pass away from COPD, which was a huge loss for our community, but it was a really big loss for me because I'd really gotten to know Gene pretty well over the previous year, and Gene was always somebody that I could bounce questions off of much after he had retired. I could still ask him questions about things that I was unsure about out here, and he was always happy to make time for me. So let me go here. So here's the Aransas County Terminal building before Hurricane Harvey. It doesn't look much different now. It didn't sustain a lot of damage, but I rode the hurricane out in the this terminal building. Now it sits on some of the highest land in Aransas County, but still my risk was kind of calculated because this building was built to withstand 160 mile an hour of sustained wind. We saw sustained winds here of 143 miles an hour. I saw that wind myself on our weather dissemination computer, and which is wind that's in weather that's taken right here on the field. It's actually the wind and weather that's reported to the National Weather Service. And so there's been some controversy over the years since Harvey about what the official winds were, but I can attest that I saw 143 excuse me, with 161 gust, and the building did pretty well. You see, we got that big glass bank wall there. Our plan early on, my plan was to cover that wall and the rest of the building's windows with the plexi covers that you can actually see at the top of the A-frame here. Those plexiglass covers, they screw on to a rail system, to a track, we generally leave these up in the top, that we leave those on year round, but in the event of a hurricane in the Gulf, we have to do all the windows in those. And that takes a little bit more time than I'd budgeted for. I'll get into that in my lessons learned and best practices portion of the presentation. After the landfall of a major hurricane, and a major hurricane, everybody knows now, we're all experts, that's a Cat 3 and higher. We had a Cat 4 and really close to a Cat 5. But after after a landfall of a major hurricane, you know, I started asking the questions on the left. What do we do now? Who do we call? Who could we call? You know, we didn't have any cell phone towers. All the landlines were down. Every utility pole and cell phone tower in our community was snapped in half. Is everybody okay? Did my house survive? Did the airport survive? And finally, what's for breakfast and where do we start? But I'll be honest with you, for breakfast, I think I had a Pop-Tart, and that's the last thing I remember eating for a long time. We got paid a visit by Larry Sinclair and Jerry Lawing from the Rockport PD right after the hurricane. Along with me here in the terminal, I had one of my coworkers, Richard Chatwell, and his wife and son came and stayed here during the hurricane. And then I had my brother-in-law, Davis Merrill, here as well. And we just decided that if we weren't going to leave town, we wanted to stay in probably the most secure building we could. This was it. And one of the reasons I decided to stay, and I hadn't really made my decision until the winds were such that I probably couldn't have gotten out of town safely, but I wanted to stay until I was sure that the airport was as squared away as I could get it. And really, by the time that I would have made the decision to leave, it was already made for me. So where did we start? That was the big question. And, you know, after something like this, you don't really know, but you have to have a starting point. So for our starting point was to assess the destruction and try to get the runways open. Even though I'd had a preliminary report from the Rockport PD that everybody at the EOC was okay, and then they carried our information back down there that we were all right. I still didn't know how many people in our community had been affected. And so I figured that we needed to get the runways open pretty quick to start getting some planes in and out of here, at least some helicopters in and out for the injured. And so the first thing that we did was we started picking up screws and bolts and nuts and everything that you could think of that was thrown around on the runways on the surface. You can't land on a runway with a plane if there's all this junk laying around out there, just for the same reason you can't drive up and down the highways. Everybody remembers right after the hurricane, we had everybody in town had flat tires. Well, we were no exception out here, and certainly a flat tire on an aircraft is a big deal. But it's not just airplanes, fixed wings. It's also helicopters. They can throw this stuff around at hundreds of miles an hour. It becomes a projectile. A jet engine could ingest any one of these pieces, and it could destroy the engine, and the pilot might not know until he was on takeoff roll. So this debris is known as foreign object or foreign object damage when it actually does some damage. But everybody, if anybody's listening that was in the military, you're probably familiar with this term, especially if you're in the Navy or the Air Force. We spent a lot of time picking up foreign object debris to prevent that damage. But literally, we picked up buckets, and I mean 5-gallon buckets at a time. Richard and I did. The next morning after the hurricane, we spent that time driving around on golf carts and some of our other vehicles that survived the hurricane, and got as much as we could. But we didn't ever feel like we were giving it the attention that it really required, and it wasn't because we didn't want to. It's just because we just didn't have the manpower to do it. We have miles and miles of pavement here at the airport, and all of it is either 60 foot wide or 100 foot wide. So, what we ended up deciding is we're not going to get this runway cleared off by ourselves. Let's clear some areas for helicopters. Well, that was a great idea, getting the helicopters in here. It enabled us to get offshore workers back out to the rigs. Because they didn't know what they had. They didn't know if they were having leaks, if they had breaches or anything. So it was important for those guys to get back out right away. But the main thing was we didn't have any fuel. Both of our fuel trucks were trapped in a fallen hangar. Again, I'll get to that in kind of the lessons learned and best practices portions. But our fuel trucks were trapped, and so we didn't really know how we were going to get fuel to any of the helicopters that were coming in. There's no reason for them to come here if they couldn't have fuel. So one of the pilots was a Vietnam era pilot, and he really took control of that for us, and showed us how we could kind of piece together what we had in order to get fuel directly off the fuel farm. So it's kind of unorthodox. We didn't have any way to measure the fuel or meter it. All we basically did was just wait for the pilot to see on his gauge that he had enough fuel to complete the mission. And so that began that process. That was for the next 24 to 48 hours that we did that, basically around the clock. We were also home to a Coast Guard detachment. They were doing lots of offshore exploration for research, or for recovery anyway. And then they had the National Guard flew in many times to bring in folks to tour the area to see what we needed. And really the only way for them to get in and out fast was by helicopter. They also brought in a little bit of relief. But without having clean fuel to be able to give those guys, there was no way we were going to be able to get that kind of response. Airports around our area were also affected. Refugio, Victoria, Corpus, Campbell Porter up the road. Those airports were closed and stayed closed for a while as well. So anybody coming in for fuel or coming in here had to have enough fuel to get out. And by get out, I mean get out past one of those airports before they were able to get aviation grade gasoline or jet fuel. So the first planes and trucks started to arrive, and it just was kind of natural that the airport was going to be a distribution center and a staging area for the recovery effort. The plane you see here, that was actually the first aircraft we had that landed that was a fixed-wing airplane after we got the runways cleared. And we still didn't have gasoline to be able to fuel us, the smaller planes like this. So they had to plan on that, and that meant they were bringing in really lightweight things or not a lot of anything. So you can see these guys brought in a couple of canopies, some tarps and a few things, and that was great. So we started staging that stuff up. HEB was really quick with a couple of trailers full of water that came right away. We had some room out here on the flight line, so we kind of made that the home for the distribution from the 18-wheeler trailer standpoint. And then we kind of set up an on-airport distribution, and I say kind of set it up. We were learning as we were going. We hadn't planned on this being as big of a distribution center as it ended up being, but we also didn't really know what size of or what scope this disaster was going to be. But fellow Texans chipped in, people from out of state chipped in. We had planes from all over. They were flying in the goods such as tarps and tape, plastic sheeting, blankets, pillows. Baby diapers was the one that I felt was kind of odd because we didn't have a lot of folks that stayed behind with their babies, but and that was actually some of the last stuff that was distributed back when folks started coming back to town. Non-perishable canned goods, lightweight items. Again, we didn't have any gas available, so the payload and their weight was absolutely an issue whenever planning on coming here. When we finally got the runways cleared of the large debris and the screws, we felt like we got the screws taken care of. We were able to land some bigger planes. This is a Cessna Caravan. It's basically a cargo van. And all the seats were taken out, and they piled in from front to back window unit air conditioners, generators, heavier items that wouldn't have been able to be flown in on smaller planes. And again, over 100 aircraft participated in the resupply effort. So when a plane like this would come in, usually we knew about it ahead of time, and we coordinated with somebody to meet the aircraft on the ramp with a trailer so we could just get this stuff right downtown immediately as soon as possible. It never had to set anywhere and wait for distribution. We got it right directly to the people that needed it. Rockport PD assisted in that process, and we made sure that it was as a fair and judicious process as we could. But again, we didn't take possession of any of these things necessarily, and so we were just trying to make sure the churches were involved and anybody that could tell us where the stuff needed to go. Later, And again, I'll go back to here. We had some things going on simultaneous to this that I'll get to. When it was all going on, I really felt like I was in 3 or 4 places at the same time. And when I go back to my memory of it, it's hard for me to discern what happened exactly in what process, or in what sequence. But I was out here for 16 hours a day, every day for a month, and so some things run together. Every once in a while, I refer back to my notes to get a pretty clear or a better picture of how it went. But while this is going on, I'll show you. We had AEP, that's our electrical supplier for our region, the coastal bend, and AEP was bringing trucks out here one after the other and equipment, and I'll get into that in just a little bit too, as how we played a role in that and what our plan was initially going in. So later, we started getting larger deliveries of things like plywood and drywall, building materials that really in the county, there was nowhere else to put this stuff. Basically, everything with a big enough roof had been destroyed, or the roof was ripped off. So we had one hangar that survived. We lost 9 hangars. We lost over 200,000 square foot of space. But we had one hangar that survived, and it was good enough that we could get some stuff inside and kind of keep it out of the weather for the most part. This stuff got handed out a little differently. All these things, since they were donated to Aransas County, they were subject to the Stafford Act, and so they had to be handed out. Again, they had to be distributed a lot differently than just the stuff that was flown in by just the civilian pilots. So ahead of the storm, and how I thought the airport would serve as a staging area was, we knew AEP would be out here with bucket trucks and crews. And so I worked in 2015. I put a plan together with Mr. Bob Dupnick from AEP, and we came up with a closed taxiway that had not been milled or destroyed. So we decided we'll use this pavement. It'll have the least impact on the airport or the community. We'll just let the AEP set up on this little closed runway or closed taxiway here. It was 1,500 feet by 60 feet wide. Bob and I both felt like that would be plenty for what they would need. They'd have enough room for their bucket trucks and for the man camps, and for the living quarters. Everything would be fine. They would set up their own generators, and we'd basically leave them to it. And but reality was that we would need over 12 times more space than was actually required from what we'd planned on. So what happened was, it was early that morning on the 26th, I was leading a few trucks into the airport and telling them where to park out on that closed taxiway. And so we showed them that they could kind of start staging up right here. And then I took a look down John Wendell Road, which runs into the airport. And then I looked down 35, and I could see that there were a sea of headlights all the way back into downtown. So I made that decision pretty quick to go ahead and abandon the idea of the closed taxiway, which is over here on the right side of the screen. And then I just decided we're going to go ahead and close our north-south runway, and we'll close the north-south taxiway that supports it. And we're going to set these guys up on that side of the field. And so we did. They ended up using about every square inch of it. What you're seeing here, this is a picture from probably a week or two in to the hurricane recovery. And I took this shot just to kind of illustrate how much land was being used. But if I had taken this picture at about 7:30 p.m. any given night, you would have seen bucket trucks lined up one side of the runway, down the other side, and then up and down the taxiway that supports it. There were 250, I think, bucket trucks, probably another 150 to 200 support vehicles, and then up to 1,200 men and women lived at the airport in the man camps so that they could stay right on site. They either stayed in the cabs of their trucks or they stayed in those man camps. They had showers, everything on site for them. And additionally, they had a food tent that operated around the clock. They got this food tent set up within 72 hours. The man camp was set up at about the same time frame. And they had living quarters for the hundreds, if not thousands, of workers right on the airport. I think this was particularly important because if we hadn't found a place where they could have set this kind of operation up, we likely wouldn't have had them in our area. They would have been in Corpus or maybe even as far as Victoria. And it would have taken a lot longer for them just to travel to the disaster zone to complete their work. In other words, we would have had to count on travel time. And as it was, they were able to go to work right out of the airport, and in some cases drive less than a mile to start their work of putting up the utility poles. So I really do think that it was very fortuitous that we were able to donate as much space as we could in the short time frame. I'll tell you now, the plan going forward, our new plan is to go ahead and dedicate that same runway and taxiway to the effort, no matter how large the scope of the disaster. We also dealt with a lot of private property issues. There was some folks that decided not to take their aircraft out of the airport, or they just decided they didn't have time, or perhaps they were out of the area and just had to trust that their planes were going to be okay. But we lost 9 hangars, and 26 airframes were completely destroyed and totaled. Some people lost everything. Some people lost, or some people's planes could be repaired, but for the most part, the 26 planes that were lost in total, they'll never fly again. They're taken off the board. That's affected more. Obviously it affected the plane owner, but it affected us too, because that was our customer base. We had 50 aircraft that were stationed here, or that were staged here and based here before the hurricane. And so losing about half of that, that's going to affect our bottom line for a lot of years to come. It's going to be kind of hard to replace the aircraft, because if you think about it, an airplane, especially a general aviation airplane, they're designed to be around for many, many years, several lifetimes, in fact, many generations. And so, a lot of the planes we had here were built in the 1950s and 60s, and they're just not making any more planes like that. A brand new Cessna 172 will cost you $300,000, but a Cessna 172 from 1972 or 73 would probably run you about $30,000, and it's a fine aircraft. They're taken care of better than a classic car or even a historical home in some cases. So for us, it was kind of a big deal because so many general aviation game pieces were off the board forever. We also dealt with folks that lost their vehicles that happened to be parked inside of hangars. That white truck there in the middle of that screen, that belonged to me, and it was totaled. And the guy down here on the bottom right, he had a heavy lift operation with helicopters. He lost over $1 million worth of helicopters and maxed out his insurance policy. And still could have claimed more if it had been available. He won't be able to do business anymore. He won't be coming back after we rebuild. So again, we lost more than just plane owners. We lost businesses as well. This gentleman lost his aircraft. Obviously, it was turned upside down. This picture made the rounds on the news, and you may have seen it in the paper, but he was able to salvage some things from his airplane and kind of recoup his loss a little bit, but he didn't have a full coverage policy. He had general liability only. So again, it's folks that own these planes are a lot like you and me. It's not everybody out here is a millionaire. There's regular people out here that do this for recreation and some for business. So how did the airport serve the community in the days before and after Hurricane Harvey? Well, number one is we knew we would be a recovery and staging point with respect to our power grid. AEP brought out these poles right after the hurricane. We had plenty of places to stack them. There were many times more than what you're seeing in this picture, but every one of them got used because literally every pole we had was smashed. And so we served as a recovery and staging area for the infrastructure, and we knew we were going to do that, and we'll do it again next time, like I talked about. Then we also served as a donation management focal point. This plane right here, as gimmicky as it looks, being a World War II era aircraft, it still serves for disaster recovery and donation dissemination. So we were fortunate to have this plane make 2 trips. They brought in a lot of stuff for people. We got that stuff distributed downtown pretty quickly. And then finally, we assisted the flying public and our customers with trying to get as much of their assets out of these hangars before they went down as possible, for not only for if there was something that had sentimental value or something that had other value, but also just to help with insurance claims. And so I go back to this. This is a picture I took during the hurricane as it had crossed the barrier island, San Jose Island, and right as it was making a landfall in Rockport, right before we lost all of our telemetry and everything. And that's where they officially named it a Cat 4 storm with winds in excess of 130 miles an hour. But I thought of a quote by Mike Tyson, and y'all probably know who he is. Not everybody likes Mike. I like him all right. I think he's wiser than he lets on. But Mike said about a fight that he was about to have, a reporter asked him about about his opponent's plan to fight him, and Mike said, "I think everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth." And I recall thinking that as we were as the hurricane was making landfall, that our plan probably wasn't as fortified as we needed it to be. In fact, earlier in the summer, Judge Mills had asked all department heads to come up with a 72-hour plan for a hurricane or some other disaster, hurricane being the most likely. And so we'd submitted our plan out here. It got approved, it looked good. And it's still, I believe, in a 72-hour situation, it was a pretty good plan. The problem with Hurricane Harvey is we only had a 40-hour notice, as some of you may remember. Before it, after it came across the Yucatan Peninsula, it was still kind of I guess a tropical depression, and it started forming rather quickly. And once it formed, it intensified even quicker. So we only had a 40-hour notice, but we went right to work as soon as it came across the Yucatan and looked like it might redevelop. But again, I knew right away that I needed a new and more flexible plan. So instead of a 72-hour plan now, we just have a plan that is we don't have a time frame on it. It's whenever we initiate it, we have certain people who do certain things and go straight to work. And if somebody evacuates early and decides they don't want to stay for the mandatory evacuation order, then we have somebody else. The next man up is ready to step up and take over. The other thing is I learned, one of my lessons learned is that you shouldn't put, just like Grandma told us, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And that was never more evident. And I had that sinking feeling in my stomach when I watched one of our buildings go down out here a full hour before the hurricane made landfall, that I had in fact put way too many eggs in one basket. And so that was definitely a lesson learned. I had the opportunity to speak a couple of times around the state on behalf of our community and how we handle it here, specifically from the airport. And I touched base on that in a lot more detail about lessons learned and best practices. But these were the ones I think that really stood out. Best practices, we should have spent some more money out here to save some things, to save buildings. And now that I know that, we have spent some money. We've accessed a couple of different grants to go ahead and outfit the terminal rather with some automatic hurricane measures, prevention measures that we didn't have before. Everything we did out here was manual. I thought it would take about 4 to 8 hours to outfit the terminal building with plexiglass, and it actually took 2 days. So with that by the time we were done putting on the last piece of the plexiglass, the winds were already high enough that we weren't going anywhere. So that tells you a little bit about how misguided my plan was. So we can outfit the terminal building in about 20 minutes as opposed to 2 days. So we got a lot more time to look around the airport, make sure we're taking every possible step. Every hurricane pin is planted. Every door is chained where we can chain it. Every vehicle, every loose piece of equipment is tied down or not in harm's way. And so by the next hurricane, hopefully we will have a lot less real damage at the airport. When we get these buildings rebuilt, luckily our insurance policy here, by the way, we haven't depended on FEMA for anything at the airport except some crew cars. When we lost those vehicles, FEMA decided that they would replace the vehicles for us. But as far as buildings and airport lighting and all that. We had an insurance policy that's taken really good care of us. It's just taken a lot of time to get things done. But when we get these buildings rebuilt, they'll be built for 150 mile an hour, in some cases more. So I know that when a lot of our hangars were built, they weren't built to that wind speed. In fact, there was no code when some of them were built, so we don't know what they were built to. They could have just been built to a budget. But going forward, we'll have very fortified structures here. And then finally, best practices, something we didn't do that often. We wrote a policy, or we wrote our plan, but we didn't do anything about it. We didn't run drills and exercises. Had we run drills, I would have seen very quickly that 8 hours was not enough time to get the plexiglass covers on the building, and I could have taken some action probably before in June, full 2 months before the hurricane. And then finally, practice for the real deal. We do that now. Hurricane Hannah, when it made landfall last month, she came in south of Rockport, south of Corpus, but all along we were in the cone of uncertainty. So we planned on Hannah hitting Rockport ground zero. And we practiced like that. Even after we knew the hurricane was going to land much further south, we stayed with our plan to go ahead and continue everybody doing exactly what they were supposed to. And I think we would have been ready for a landfall, even though the wind wasn't as much. Water, the storm surge will probably likely never affect the airport, given our the fact that we're 25 feet above sea level here. Again, some of the highest land in the county, but if the airport is underwater, we've all got a problem, I suppose. This is the 1943 hangar before August 25th, 2017. This was built by the Navy in 1943 when the airport was first built as a naval training base for World War II pilots. And the reason I'm showing you this hangar is because we felt like this was probably the most fortified structure on the airport. It had seen hurricanes in the past and survived with flying colors. A lot of heavy steel, a lot of cinder block or construction masonry units, CMU, made up this building, and we felt like very sturdy. This is that same hangar on the morning of August 26, 2017. So this is where I put all my eggs in that basket, and clearly that was a bad idea. Over here on the left-hand side where my cursor is, that's our jet truck. It's a 3,000-gallon jet fuel truck. It was trapped by the beam that you see that's going across it right here. It actually served to support that beam a little bit. And in fact, when we finally did get the truck out, the building went ahead and collapsed all the way down to the ground. Our avgas truck is the little truck that you see right here beside it. It didn't have any weight on it. It had some damage, busted windshield and things like that, but otherwise it was still operational. We had some work to do to the jet truck, but the gasoline truck to me at this point was more important because we didn't have any way to give gasoline to our smaller aircraft that were trying to participate in the recovery effort. And so here's something I didn't know was going to happen, but we had a special services crew that was on its way to help us. Had received no forewarning or anything of their arrival. I know now that they're available, and so that's part of my plan. Is anytime that we have a hurricane or anything headed at us, I did this with Hannah. I called the state, let them know what we were expecting, and they had a special services crew. In fact, the same special services crew ready to come help us. These guys train together. They work together. There's very low turnover in their department, and they're qualified on a lot of different equipment. They're qualified to make a lot of different assessments and help with engineering that I'm not necessarily qualified for. And so when they got here, Matthew Hines is the guy on the far left here. Matthew is the crew lead, and he said, "Hey, we're here to help." And this was day 2, by the way, morning of. And they said, "We're here to help, and we just need a place to stay if you can help us with that. And otherwise, we're sleeping in the cabs of our trucks." And in the airport terminal, we had electricity because of the generator backup power was working. And so we put these guys up in our pilot's lounge. It's about 400 square feet, but it was air conditioned. It had a little bit of running water, what running water we had. And there were plenty of places for them to sleep and bed down. So they were much obliged to trade their work for a place to stay. I know right after they were done with our airport, they were supposed to head to Refugio and help get that airport open. They were supposed to stay with us originally for 3 or 4 days. It ended up being longer, and I can tell you about why that happened. And the aircraft right behind them is a large part of, well, the only reason that they had to stay back an extra day. That's a United States Marine Corps V-22 Osprey. It's part of the presidential and vice presidential short field takeoff and landing detachment. And there were 5 of those aircraft that were here. And the day that Vice President Pence arrived, he flew into Victoria on a larger aircraft and then did a windshield tour over to Rockport. And then the plan was for these guys to pick him up and fly him out back to Victoria. And when he arrived, he also had the governor of Texas with him, Governor Abbott, and some secretaries of the president's cabinet. And getting back real quick on here, I'll tell you too, Matthew dispatched this gentleman right here, Corey. He went over to the Rockport TxDOT yard and procured a skid steer with a 6-foot sweeper broom on the front of it. And Corey came back and swept our runways and taxiways for 4 days. 4 days straight, he stayed in there, only coming out for bathroom breaks, lunch, and then a water break occasionally. But other than that, he stayed after it and to fuel the equipment, obviously. But without him here to sweep in like he did on the taxiways and runways, we never could have been completely certain that we got all that foreign object debris and damage prevented. They also helped lift the fallen hangar beams off of our field trucks with a piece of equipment that they brought. Again, we didn't, everybody else around here was trying to deal with their own issues. There's no way I could have borrowed any equipment from anybody downtown to get up here and do that. We had our hands full. They had their hands full. So without these guys showing up just to help us, these were our first responders at the airport. Without them being here, no way we could have done it. They assisted with some of the larger pieces of debris. We had hangar doors, hangar roofs, planes laying on the runway. If my only option before they got here was to drag that stuff off the pavement, and that would have caused severe scarring and probably done long-term damage to the pavement. So when they got here, we were able to lift some things off, and that helped as well. So finally, they stayed a day longer than they needed to, because what happened was when the vice president got here onto the flight line, Secret Service locked down the building. Well, these guys were with us inside, and so we were watching out the big bank of windows as they loaded everybody on board the aircraft. And then when they took off, the military Air Force One and the Marine Corps One, they always fly a little bit more aggressively whenever they have the vice president or the president aboard. And so what happened is when these things took off, they took off under full power away from our flight line and then out to the runway. And they flew past some of the debris that we had staged up in piles. And when that happened, the debris scattered again out onto the pavement. And every piece of sheet metal that we had stacked up still had screws in it. And so as it was tumbling around on the flight line, undoubtedly screws were coming out. So we knew we had to have help for at least a little while longer to get that squared away before they left. So Matthew obliged, and he stayed. The crew stayed an extra day and helped us. So without that, without their effort there, again, we would have had to close the airport back down, confusing everybody, delaying things more, and with communication being as bad as it was, we might have missed somebody, and somebody might have tried to land, and they might have picked up some foreign object damage. And so I had the opportunity to honor that special services crew at the Texas A&M Transportation Institute for a conference in Texas A&M. And while we were there, we gave them a plaque with a signed letter from the judge, from Judge Mills, about how much we appreciated their effort, along with that picture that you just saw. We put that in the frame for them and gave it to them. They hung it on the wall of their training quarters back in Austin, and it still hangs there today. And as far as I know, these guys are still a unit. Dave Fulton, the guy that I showed you at the beginning that was standing up next to the sign, Dave Fulton, the TxDOT Aviation Department Director, he had a quote at that conference that I thought was worth repeating here. And he said, "The importance of aviation in response to a hurricane was never more evident than what we saw in Rockport after Harvey." And basically, Dave just kind of told you everything that I've already told you here, that never could have had the goods and services staged here at this airport if we couldn't have gotten it cleaned up. If we couldn't have gotten the big chunks of debris, the falling buildings, the everything that we had here, if we couldn't have gotten it cleaned up, we likely would have never had AEP here, and ultimately we never would have had any kind of materials and goods flown in. These are my all-stars at the airport. This is some of my crew. 3 of these guys, these 3 guys, and then one other. To the 2 guys on the right side, they've moved on. Robert Garcia here on the tailgate of the truck, he still works for the county. He works in the maintenance department. He got his HVAC certification, so the county we saw some better opportunities for him, so we let him go over there. Mike McFerrin has since retired. Richard Chatwell here on the left. Richard was the one that stayed with me here through the hurricane, and he worked nonstop through the night of the hurricane and the morning after and the 26 days after that. Truly a hero. He did as much work, physical work, as anybody in the county, and I would put him up against that. If you saw his timesheet, you'd understand what I mean by that. And then down here at the bottom, Richard's posing in front of Mr. George Strait's aircraft. That's a G4. It's a pretty good sized plane, probably the biggest plane that we would want to see. And George came in on day 7 or 8, and without having the airfield cleaned off, for a $60 million jet, they're not going to land it. So they felt pretty confident that we were going to get their plane in. And then what you can't see is right in front of George's plane is a G5, which is a few feet longer and a few thousand pounds heavier. And that was the plane of the Secretary of Homeland Defense, a Coast Guard aircraft that flew the Secretary in, and she was able to have boots on the ground and assess some damage as well. And then finally, there's no way I could have stayed and felt like that I could let my family go inland without my own support staff, which is my wife, Reagan, and without having her and knowing that she could take care of my kiddo and my mom and my other family members that went with her and our cats and dogs. There's no way I could have stayed. I would have just made the decision a lot earlier to leave. And not that my being here during the hurricane or the hours right after made that big a difference, but I think having stayed back, I was certainly able to help better coordinate the effort. And not sure how things would have looked when I got back. So it might have been a lot more work to kind of untie some knots that had been tied while I was gone. So I was very fortunate to be able to stay behind, but there's no way I could have done it without her. And this ends my presentation, and I'll open it up for questions. But before I do, I was going to show you, if you let me real quick, show that sign again. That's the new airport sign. Can I screen share again? I rolled out. Sorry. That's the new airport sign that we put up after the new airport sign that was destroyed by Harvey. Insurance obviously paid for us to have a new sign, but because about half of the people in that picture I showed originally really hated the sign, and only half of the people liked it, kind of like everything else in our community, I thought, let's just go ahead and put one up that has some real meaning and has some kind of speaks of what our airport stands for. And so these the wings, anytime you see wings on aviation related goods and services, that goes back to the halcyon days of aviation after World War II, when pilots came home from the war, and there was really no flying jobs for those guys. So that's how general aviation was born. And now you have all these little airfields that sprung up across the United States because of surplus military property that was given back to the communities. It was just kind of a natural thing that we were going to have general aviation be born. And so everything that was advertised had wings on it, whether it was the tires for your airplane or the fuel or the oil that you were going to burn. Even though it might have been the same oil you'd have put in your 55 Chevy truck, if it had wings on it, that made it, you just thought it was automatically for aviation purposes. So we thought the wings were a nice touch. If you'll notice, the whole sign it's kind of in the shape of an A, with the arrow pointing down the road toward the airport, crossing the A. And the reason for that was the kind of hidden meaning there is obviously A for Aransas County, but a lot of the Navy pilots and even civilian pilots that fly in here, they can't their mouths can't produce the word Aransas. They call us Aransas or Arkansas County Airport and everything else. So it's real easy just to say A County Airport. So I'll refer to our airport a lot of times as A County. A lot of the pilots will refer to it as that. The other thing is the A in the middle between the wings here. That's actually the configuration of our runways. Our runways are in a V. And then we had a runway that was decommissioned some years back that went across the middle of the field, our 0927 runway. And that's the cross of the A right there. And so we thought we would just kind of commemorate that in this sign as well, kind of as a throwback to an homage to our heritage. And again, I'll open it up for questioning, and I'll give the screen back right now.
All right, thank you so much, Mike. That was great. It's really impressive what you all were able to do, and I know that the community was really appreciative of it, and thank you for muscling through. I know that you're not feeling really well, so we appreciate you hanging in there for us, and so if you don't mind taking a couple questions,
Sure.
we'll open it up to the folks here at the History Center first, and then for those of you that are online, please use the chat box. So, are you able to access the chat box?
I see it right now. Yes, sir.
Okay. So first, do we have anybody here that has any questions?
Yeah, speaking for the audience, Mike, thanks for the job you did.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, when it hit around 8, and then as it went through the night, say 10, 11, when those 140 miles sustained came into play, and you were out there watching that hangar go down, what was going through your mind?
Yeah, and so when I saw the first metal door come off the side of that hangar, it was a little roll-up door that was on the side, and that was at about 7 o'clock. And I could see that hangar really well because it's right here close to the terminal. It used to be right here by the terminal. So I was standing out in the back side of the terminal. I watched that door rip off, and I thought, wow, that's not good, because I limited knowledge that I have about hurricanes and tornadoes is that once it gets breached, it's probably going to be gone. So I started thinking that we might lose it at that point, but again, I was hopeful. It was a pretty strong building. It had been through some big hurricanes, but the last time it was really tested was in, I guess, the 1960s or early 1970s. Some people that have been here forever might know more than I on what that hurricane was. I want to say Celia, maybe.
Yeah.
But what we found out after that hurricane went down, and really just to tell you really quick, Diane, is that Diane that I'm talking to?
Diane and Mike.
Yeah. Is what I felt was that what I mentioned earlier, I had that sick feeling in my stomach that, hey, we've got a lot of assets in there, and if this thing goes down, we're going to be up a creek for a while. And so I worried tremendously about that, but I knew that there was really nothing I could do about it at that point. But going back to when it saw the last big number, the big wind number in the 70s, that may have weakened this building more than we knew, and it may have caused opportunities for decay to kind of happen and maybe be accelerated over that time. So again, lesson learned is, even though it had survived a hurricane before, and even a big hurricane at that, there may have been enough time in between that one and this one that the building was just degraded enough that it kind of crumbled and couldn't handle it.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have questions here?
The person who's got their hand up, do we unmute it? Do I need to unmute it?
There's a user under iPhone, and it does look like you're unmuted, so you could either speak your question or you could put it in the chat box. And again, if anybody else has questions, please use the chat box.
Okay, this is Debbie Griffith. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. That was really good and informative. Really appreciated it. I've only lived here about 2 years now, full time, and have never really been out there much to the airport except to a hangar for a film festival. And so
Oh, yeah.
it was nice to see photos more about what was there. So a couple of my questions are, I go out to Howard Murph Park pretty often, and I constantly, almost every time I go, which does tend to be Fridays, I see small aircraft doing, I guess, touch and goes round and round and round and round. Who is that?
That's the Navy.
Okay.
There are two primary Navy training bases for aviation in the United States. And when I say primary, I mean the first plane that naval aviators actually get into before they go to advanced training. And Corpus Christi Naval Air Station is one, and Pensacola Naval Air Station in Florida is the other. And it's about 50-50 split. About half the cadets go to Pensacola, the other half come here. And then out of the operations that they do from Corpus, they use all the reason they are here in this area is because of it's not very congested airspace.
Mm-hmm.
We all moved here because of the sunshine and the beaches and the birds, but the Navy's been here since World War II, and it was because number one, it was we get a lot of sunny days. Number two, the airspace and the population is not that crowded, so there's not a lot of people at risk. But nevertheless, they out of the fields that they use, and I mean by fields I mean airports that the Navy uses for touch and goes outside of Navy Corpus, is because they can't go to Corpus Christi International because of all the civilian airliner traffic that goes in and out. So they use smaller airports. We're one of 5 small airports that they use out of Corpus Christi, and out of those 5 airports, or out of the off Navy Corpus airports, we get about 20 to 25% of those operations. So you'll never see more than 3 or 4. 4 is the biggest number of planes that they can have in our pattern at one time. And I'll be honest with you, I've had conversations with the Navy about it. They've done their environmental assessments and everything, but I'm an air traffic controller by trade, and 4 fast moving aircraft in one little pattern like this kind of tends to kind of raise the hair on my neck a lot. And but they're comfortable with it. And but I think kind of as a courtesy to me, they kind of keep that number at 3 as an unspoken rule.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I definitely noticed it. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've gone or even taken visitors there, and it's kind of interesting to watch, but you certainly can't hear, because I figured there was more than one, because it's like there's no way they made that circle that fast.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, to be honest with you, they switched from a much quieter aircraft that was a post Vietnam era trainer. Recently in 2015, they switched to the new plane, and it's considerably louder. Number one, because it's a jet burning aircraft as opposed to the gasoline planes that they had before. But coming here as a tourist, as I did for many years before I had the opportunity to move here, I always kind of felt like it was part of Rockport's charm to have those planes here. But now, things are a little different now. I understand that this is a more high performance aircraft. So we've signed an MOU, a memorandum of understanding with the Navy, and that's available for the public to access. I guess it is. If it's not, if somebody wanted it, I can give it to them. But it's open to the Freedom of Information Act. But the MOU with them basically states that they're not going to overcrowd us if we request that they don't. Number one, and number two, if they're only supposed to fly from 8 in the morning to 6 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and then on Friday they're supposed to cut off at noon, and then we're not supposed to have any flying from the Navy on the weekend. If we have a big event of local significance, say Hummerfest or the Hummerfest or something like that, they generally will stop flying on Wednesday of that week, so that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday we can enjoy the visitors and the birds.
Yeah.
But
okay.
But then I see that was this your question here about the electricity as well?
No, that must have been somebody else's.
Okay, and then just in response to this one about did the airport have electricity before the town? The answer is no, but what we had is generator power. So if you were driving down Highway 35 at night and you looked over at the airport and it was lit up, that's because we have a generator that runs the airfield lighting, and then we have a generator that runs the airport terminal in one of our hangars. And so we had electricity in the fact that we had generator power out here, but we didn't have we didn't have some of the other things that everybody else was doing without, say, connectivity or cell coverage or anything like that. We were still running messages by person downtown.
I do have another question. I don't know if I'm jumping in and someone else is trying to speak. I apologize. Like I say, I wasn't here. I had a house here, but I wasn't here full time at the time of Harvey. And I just remember, you know, being on Facebook and all the controversy about a huge supply of maybe lumber and such that was being warehoused. I don't know if that was warehoused out at the airport or not, but was it, and was that, you know, a big controversy, and is that stuff still there?
Right. And so in the presentation, I showed the big pile of plywood that had the yellow banner around it.
Yes.
That was plywood that was donated to us by the Church of Scientology. And by us, I mean Aransas County. It wasn't to the airport. I had no jurisdiction over it, except that I was basically the custodian of it to make sure that we kept it as dry as we could. The hangar that it was in had a lot of holes in the roof. We patched as many of those as we could to keep water off of it. But we didn't get a lot of rain right away after Harvey. But when the rain finally did come, we did everything we could to keep it dry. But some of it didn't stay dry, and so some of it was lost just due to water damage. But I mentioned the Stafford Act whenever I talked about that. And the Stafford Act, I'm no expert on it, but basically the Stafford Act says that anything that you get like that, you have to, any kind of donation you get like that, you basically have to vet it against anything you're already doing with FEMA or some other grant. In other words, that stuff couldn't go for a project that was already being used to access a FEMA grant or whatever. So there was a lot of paperwork that got involved with that. I think the what I learned from that, and I think hopefully what we learned here too as a community, that next time if that happens, if anybody ever wants to donate a large amount of supplies like that, they need to give it directly to a church or directly to some other 501c3, because then it's not subject to the Stafford Act like it would have been if the county was handing that out to just whoever needed it. So yeah, dissemination of that material ended up being kind of a sore spot for folks, but whenever that got worked out, it went really quickly, and a lot of people were still able to get a hold of it.
Okay, that's good. Good to know. Okay, well, that's all the questions I have.
And I have another question here. It says, I live in the housing on Davis Loop, been here for 15 years, wonder about if the cattle guard or gate will eventually be used. That's a good question. And I could really get into the weeds on this, but basically the cattle guard was a sore spot for the city of Rockport whenever the area that the Davis Loop housing unit and the airport, most of the airport was annexed by Rockport. And so what happened was when that cattle guard was put in for the game fence runs down John Wendell Road on the left side if you're coming into the airport until you get to the cattle guard, and that's when it goes back out to the right side to go around that housing unit and then ultimately around all the airport property over there. The airport owns 670 acres of land. That's way more than we need, way more than we use. But when they built the fence, they decided they'd go ahead and fence in as much as possible of airport land. If I had been here and made the decision, and especially knowing what I know now, I would have carried that fence all the way down to the terminal building and left the houses and all the backside of the airport out of that fence. And then I would have carried the fence all the way down to 1781 and basically kind of minimized how much area we had behind fence. Because really what you're concerned with as an airport manager or a wildlife manager, which is another one of the hats that I have to wear every day, you want to manage as little land as possible as far as keeping game off of your airport. And so what we have now is we have 600 or so of the acres of the airport are behind this game fence. We use about 400 acres. So I've got 200 acres or so back there that is basically a wildlife habitat. If anything is able to get inside, it's able to propagate and basically go without predation, and ultimately could be a problem for us if a deer were to get onto a runway. That would be hugely that could be very disastrous. So the game fence, while it keeps hogs out, we don't have much problem with hogs. Occasionally a deer will get in if somebody leaves the gate open or something like that, and that happens. But nevertheless, so the cattle guard issue. So whenever when we got annexed by our city of Rockport, John Wendell Road was a county road on the county books. And so I think it was more of an assumption that it would be taken on as a city street once it got annexed, and that just didn't happen. The city of Rockport's position was that John Wendell Road is a driveway to the airport. It's not a road at all. Even though it goes to a neighborhood, it's still not a road, it's a driveway. So they didn't want to maintain it. And John Wendell was in really bad repair when the city annexed. And so when that cattle guard was there, they used the cattle guard as an example. The fact that you've got a gate that crosses it with a cattle guard means that it's just a driveway to the airport, so we're not going to maintain it. So what I did is I took the motor out for the gate, so the gate couldn't be motorized closed, and then I welded the gate shut, or open rather. So the gate will never be closed right there. In fact, the cattle guard is there just to keep the animals out, but it's not ever going to be. We don't ever need to close the gate right there. I can't think of a scenario where we would need to do it. So took the gate out, but the cattle guard will remain, and will remain because it's the only way to keep deer and hogs off of the airport while still allowing people to get into the houses on Davis Loop. Now we're in the process of, since we're rebuilding from Harvey, we're kind of redirecting some money that we would use to repair the fence on the back side of the airport, and instead using it to put up new fence inside John Wendell all the way down to the terminal, just like I said I would have done if it had been my decision. And the reason is because if I can get that fence all the way to the terminal, and then from the terminal out to 1781, we get exactly what I was looking for earlier when I said we get a manageable piece of land from a wildlife management standpoint. And but at the same time, I'm not sure taking out the cattle guard would be the right thing. It would certainly be something we can debate about. But it's kind of nice just to keep the animals as far away from the airport as possible. So yeah, it'd be something we could talk about. I'll certainly talk to the judge about it, and we could talk to the commissioners. And if it's overwhelming that that's what the people want, then that's what we'll do.
All right. Any other questions from anybody?
Nope.
One. Go ahead. Did you have another question?
I'd like to add, if there's no more questions, I'll add one more thing before y'all dump me off, is that a lot of folks don't realize that this is, even though it's a county airport, Aransas County owns the land that the airport sits on. Now we do have obligations to operate this land as an airport. If we don't do that, then we've got a lot of grant money to pay back, and it would be cost prohibitive to do that. But because we have to operate it as an airport means we need to fund it. And I have a hard time having people understand that this airport does not rely on a single dollar from the general fund of the county budget. So all of the county budgeted money every year from taxpayers goes to other departments, whether it's road and bridge, or the transfer station, or to human resources, or accounting, or treasury, or whatever, or to the commissioner's court. None of that money comes to the airport. We are what's known as an enterprise fund within the county fund. And so we make our own money here through fuel sales, land leases, hangar rent, grants, and all that money goes into the fund for the airport. And then every year when we operate off money out of that fund. So just kind of being transparent, the airport operates on about $1 million every year, and we make about $1 million. We make sometimes more, we make sometimes a little less. But on the years that we make more, we're able to kind of stockpile that and have enough money set aside for things like grant matching, or some other capital improvement project if we need it. But we obviously have a very finite amount of space out here. We're locked between the Copano and Aransas bays, so we're not going to grow a whole lot. So predicting for the future for this airport is pretty easy when you given the fact that we're limited on what kind of operations we can do here. But I think it's important that everybody knows we're completely self-sufficient. Unless you fly a lot, you don't even pay into the grant money that we get that comes back to us from the Federal Aviation administration. So yeah, some of that, some of the aviation taxes do end up there, and that's how we get some grant money back here. But out of the 290 general aviation airports in the state of Texas, and again, we have more in the state of Texas than any other state. Out of those 289 general aviation airports, well, we're one of about 10 that operate that way, where we're able to kind of turn a profit every year and put money into our own fund. Most other GA airports have to draw off the county fund of the just to operate every year. That's a little feather in our hat.
All right. Okay. Well, Mike, thank you so much again. We really appreciate it. That was a really great presentation and some really good questions and answers. So we appreciate it. And unless you have something else to add, I guess we'll go ahead and sign off.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dave. It was a pleasure. And I'm available anytime anybody ever wants to talk or have me speak to a group. I usually try to take that opportunity to be transparent with how our airport is set up, and at the same time try to act as a PR guy, so that if you had some questions about whether or not our airport was needed for our community, I like to answer those. We're a very high functioning airport. We get recognized a lot by the state and by the federal government for that. We've won some awards out here as far as airports go, and those are all very important things when it comes to kind of proving that your airport is very high functioning in your community.
All right, great. And
thank you.
We appreciate it. So thanks again. And yep, we're going to sign off. So goodbye, everybody.